Good afternoon and welcome to the All Energy Decarbonised webinar series. I am Peter Blore, the event director for All Energy, and I would like to start proceedings by thanking everyone who has joined us today for the session on community and local energy, a beacon for 2030. This vital session is sponsored by Natural Power, so a huge thank you must go to their team. Community and local energy will have an increasingly important role to play in our future decarbonised world. Our panel today will discuss what's being done and how together we can design a local energy future. With nearly 600 registrations for this session alone, we can proudly state that over 6,500 registrations have been gained throughout our webinar series thus far, which is tremendous support from the industry. So a huge thank you once again must go to all attendees, and we look forward to bringing you more content in the forthcoming months, starting with our next edition over the 15th and 16th of July. So on to housekeeping. Throughout this session, I encourage everyone in the audience to interact with our speakers as much as possible. You can do that via voting in our polls and asking live questions. If you're watching the session in full screen mode, to vote in our polls, you will need to minimize your screen. A big thank you must also go to our chair, Jeremy Sainsbury, today, a director at Natural Power. He agreed to join us at short notice, which is hugely appreciated. Also to our 5 additional speakers in the session, which I will allow Jeremy to introduce. I will now hand you over to Jeremy to start the session. So thank you for joining us. Enjoy the content, and we look forward to seeing you all again in July.
Now, I'm hearing, is everybody else hearing a number of the introductions in sequence? My apologies. Anyway, I will bash on. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the session. It is absolutely vital that we get the just transition for communities and renewable energy correct. And oh dear, sorry. Okay, sorry. I'm doing the wrong thing, I'm told, on the Zoom process. So, my apologies. There was some technical glitches going on in the background there. As I was saying, the vital thing for communities going into the future is that there is a just transition from the world they know today to the world with the green economy. And the way in which that happens, the way in which that vision is drawn up for 2030, the options that are available to them, the one-size-fits-all approach does not work, needs to be very clearly front and center. And in the just transition, the infrastructure that's needed to give them the flexibility for the different options available needs to be fit for purpose, both in communication terms and in grid terms. So I'm delighted to have with us today a group of people whose expertise is absolutely for front and center in relation to the way in which we can deliver this, shall I call it a revolution? It may not be a revolution, certainly an evolution of how we transfer from today to the new world where heat, transport, and electricity are integrated in an energy system which is cheaper for communities in the future and gives them a comfortable style of living and makes them a participant in the future economy of Scotland. So with no further ado, I will introduce first of all Laura, I believe, from Local Energy Scotland to present her slides in relation to the programme.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I'm very pleased to be here speaking to you all live today. I'm Laura Campbell, I'm the Partnership Manager at Local Energy Scotland, and what I'm going to do is give you a quick run through what the Community and Renewable Energy Scheme is and how we've been supporting some of the renewables projects in Scotland. CARES, or the Community and Renewable Energy Scheme, or CARES as we like to call it, is a Scottish Government programme managed by Local Energy Scotland. CARES has four main aims, which are to support local ownership and community involvement in shared ownership in local energy systems, to support the Scottish Government's ambition of achieving 1 gigawatt of community and locally owned energy by 2020 and 2 by 2030, and to maximise the provision of and impact from community benefits. We have an opportunity now to focus on a green recovery by aiding economic activity that puts tackling climate change and our ambition to reach a net zero at the heart of everything we do. The support that CARES offers to rural businesses, communities and third sector organisations is an integral part of this green recovery package. This is what CARES is for, and it can be summarised as helping to turn ideas into action. Here's an example of turning an idea into action. This is the Laid In pub on the A84 just past Callander. It sells really good ales, although unfortunately it's not open at the moment. It was here some years ago that the landlord and a few regulars were complaining about the weather. It rains a lot, you couldn't tell by that photo, and how great it would be if they could use this resource on their doorstep. Several years later, after a massive amount of hard work by the community, a great project team, lots of development officer support and development funding through CARES, they now own their own 425 kilowatt hydro scheme. It's been developed on Forestry Commission land and they'll generate electricity for decades, and the profits will be invested back into their local community. It's a really great example of how you can put an idea into action and benefit the whole community. One of the main benefits of the support offered through CARES is that it's there the whole way through the project journey. From that spark of an idea, maybe in the pub, right the way through to a completed project. We have a range of support it's not just funding that's available. One of the key strengths of CARES is having a local development officer and specialist advisors on hand within the team to provide hands-on project support. There are also a range of resources available on our website, including detailed toolkits and how-to guides. We encourage communities to learn from each other, and so have set up a mentoring programme and a new CARES Communities Facebook group to encourage peer-to-peer chat. Here's another project example for you now. Over the last year, the Local Energy Scotland team supported a range of pre-registered PV installations across Scotland. And in addition to our own CARES support, they successfully applied for external grant funding on behalf of 20 community projects to reduce their capital costs. These are small projects, for example on a mosque, on community hubs, sports facilities and schools. This one, Duddingston Primary School, installed 330 kilowatts of solar panels, and in addition to the capital support raised, the remaining funds, which were around about £10,000, were raised through a range of activities, including a green day, where all the kids took part in sponsored events, cake sales, stalls at Christmas fairs, that sort of thing. This involved all the school kids, and it was driven by the mini Gretas of Primary 6, who were delighted to be involved in positive climate action. The system is owned by the school's charitable trust, and all surplus will support the work in the school, such as improving outdoor spaces, and an inclusion fund that can be used to help kids go on school trips. On the webinar yesterday, the Minister, Paul Wheelhouse, announced a new CARES funding package to encourage a green recovery. This will cover a wide range of projects and ideas. There are more details about this new funding round on our website, including guidance notes and expression of interest form. If you're interested in finding out about one of the funding themes in more detail, you could book into a pre-arranged webinar, or you can arrange your own project-specific call with members of the Local Energy Scotland team. The important thing to note here is the deadline for expressions of interest is the 22nd of July, so you've got just over a month to get your expressions of interest in. And then full applications will be expected in September, and the Local Energy Scotland team will support you to put those applications in. We still see a number of ongoing opportunities for community and local energy, and they're shown here on the slide. PV offsetting on-site demand remains viable without subsidy, and it's a great opportunity. Wind remains viable where the resource is good, however grid availability and project finance are very difficult. A move to energy systems to draw on more than one source of revenue or offset more use on site. Projects are increasingly looking to use energy for heat, evaluate storage, and plan for transport needs. Community asset transfer opens up opportunities as well. Assessing the energy needs for a new use for transferred assets can be supported by CARES. And transferred assets that we've seen to date include energy assets, land and buildings. There may also be opportunities coming from the local heat and energy efficiency strategies across Scotland and from the direction set out in the draft local energy policy statement. Other ongoing activity, community benefits continue to increase as new developments are completed. These are supported by the Scottish Government's good practice principles. We track community benefits through voluntary updates provided by project developers and communities, and this is currently showing over 21 million is provided to local communities annually. This supports a wide range of local initiatives, including energy efficiency and renewables installations. CARES can provide support to the development of community action plans to influence community benefit fund spend. Also, Scotland provides an excellent backdrop to pilot new ideas, and there's continued interest and activity in innovation projects. A few projects that CARES has been involved in include Surf and Turf, the Outer Hebrides Local Energy Hub, and the Methyl Energy Park, all forerunners for piloting hydrogen use. Learning from these will be invaluable to the new SGN hydrogen network in Leavenmouth. A key part of the local energy ambition, where large-scale developments can provide an even more significant benefit to the local economy and engagement with their local community, is through shared ownership. We're en route to the target of 50% of shared ownership by 2020, by the end of 2020, having achieved about 40% in 2019. The opportunity for communities has great potential. It encourages professional development of energy assets. It brings in revenue and retains money locally, and it connects the local area with their resource and with the energy industry. So those are some of the things that we've seen through CARES, and I'd just like to leave you with a contact slide in case you want to get back in touch with us to discuss any of those opportunities. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you very, very much indeed, Laura. And we move on swiftly. So we're hopefully getting our panelists to give you about 10 minutes each. So there's plenty of time for discussion and questions afterwards. It's all very clear. There's going to be lots of different schemes, lots of different devices open to communities, but how do we plot a way through all of that? A project manager who's had experience at dealing with this, Jodie, is a senior project manager responsible for delivery of Regen's community energy support programs. Jodie engages with communities, developers and wider renewable energy industry to support communities in the development of sustainable energy projects. So a better person to try and work our way through the maze we couldn't find. So over to you, Jodie.
Thanks very much, Jeremy, and thanks for inviting me to talk to you today. It's a real pleasure to be here and be talking to you guys live. It's very strange doing webinars in your own house with no kind of feedback and no questions coming at you from the audience. So I hope you're all right in your homes on lockdown. But I've been invited to talk to you today about what's going to happen next in the sector. So I'm going to cover a little bit about what's going on with the community and local energy sector now, talk a bit about the green recovery and resilience and local jobs, I'm going to talk quite a lot about collaboration and a little bit about engagement as well, because that is going to be fundamental. So, as Jeremy said, my name's Jodie. I've been running our communities programme at Regen for about 8 years now, and I have the pleasure of running up and down the country normally, talking to communities about what they're doing and helping them understand what's going on in the energy system transition. Regen are an independent, mission-led, not-for-profit organisation, so we get to say uncomfortable things to government and policymakers to help them make better decisions. We also do a huge amount of work with network operators, because if we to quadruple the amount of renewables we need on the system by 2050, which is what the Committee on Climate Change says we need to do, we need a better system to be able to cope with that. And so that involves working with network operators up and down the country. Right after this, I'll be chairing our Net Zero Community Energy webinar with Northern Power Grid, so if anyone's interested in that, please come and join us. We've done lots of work on local supply, work on innovation, and our communities network really underpins a lot of the work we do to make sure that the transition that's happening in our energy system, the energy revolution that is happening now, is as democratic as possible. So in terms of the current context, coronavirus has been really helping us think about community energy in the context of local resilience. You know, we've got a lot of plus points in the renewable sector now. You know, renewables are cheaper, the finance is sort of sorted, the project pipeline's getting back on track in the commercial sector, and that gives us great hope and inspiration that one day community energy will be possible again and there will be a viable business model for us. Policy, probably less said about that, the better. Lot better in Scotland and Wales than in England. But the last frontier really now for us is that this is a social challenge, because we cannot have a transition on the scale and at the speed we need to have without bringing people with us to get to net zero. And that for us means working with community energy organisations who are trusted local intermediaries. So as I say, I think community energy is absolutely key to net zero, because it builds support and local economic return, and that is crucial to getting buy-in at a local level. Community energy organisations tend to be the early adopters. They're the people who are going to influence behaviour change. They're the sorts of people who install PV and buy an electric car and put a heat pump in their home when the uptake is still quite low and it's a challenging thing to do. As I say, they're trusted, and that trust has a real value that we haven't fully recognised and realised in our energy system. We're in a country where less than 50% of people trust their energy supplier. I think that says a lot about the system that we have. And the other thing that community energy does is it really supports social justice. So it does things like tackle fuel poverty. And this is a little case study of the community energy organisation that I sit on the board of in Devon, South Dartmoor Community Energy, and some of the stats about some of the fuel poverty work we've delivered over the last year. So it really does make a real difference to people's lives, and I think Laura's kind of covered that, but you know, with some of the examples that she's given, which is fantastic. Collaboration is going to be absolutely critical, and the reason for this is because, you know, we talked about a little bit about scale earlier. The scale of projects we need now to get to financial viability to make renewables work is huge. And when we look at solar farms in England, you know, 10 megawatts is about the smallest we're seeing coming through now, but usually they're tending to be around 50 megawatts. So these are big projects requiring significant amounts of investment. And so we do think that shared ownership is going to be much more important. And we're also kind of closely watching those collaborations between communities and local authorities, public sector organisations who are looking to procure green and local power, because they're starting to recognise the social, the additional social value they're getting from community organisations delivering that power. And so this example of Devon Energy comes out of a story of 23 groups in Devon who've been networking together for years. They've all been installing their own very small, in some cases, renewable energy projects, some large, but mostly small. And they've realised that to continue doing community energy and make any meaningful contribution to our net zero targets, they're going to have to do stuff at a significant scale. So they are professionalising. They've got a pipeline of 100 megawatts of solar that they're investigating. We found some really good sites with great grid connections, the last ones in our county. And because we have been developing relationships with our local authorities over the last 10 years, we've got an agreement now in principle that those local authorities, having declared climate emergencies, want to buy the power from community energy organisations because they are recognising that additional social value they're getting. In terms of jobs and economic impact, community energy anecdotally delivers masses on this front, and it's really hard to find any kind of substantial quantitative analysis of how many jobs and how much economic impact and how much local return on investment community energy is really delivering. So this is one slide from a piece of work I did for the Institute of Welsh Affairs last year, just looking at two examples, one community energy organisation project with 2 wind turbines and 1 privately owned commercial project that I have to say has a best practice standard of community engagement. But even with that, you can see the significant difference in the amount of local jobs created for the community project. 3 local jobs for 2 wind turbines compared to 23 local jobs with 76 wind turbines. And also the amount of money going back into that community benefit fund. And that money is the sort of money that gets spent on the things like fuel poverty, energy efficiency work, and other good works in the community that enable that community to be more resilient, less reliant on outside funding and less reliant on grants. So really, really great story. Community energy is going to have to do a lot more work in terms of engagement, and that's really hard at the minute. Most of the groups that we work with are out and about delivering really great engagement face-to-face at schools, at energy fairs, at community events, and that of course has all stopped now. But this is an example of a project that I'm working on with Carbon Co-op. It's an innovation project funded by Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. It's about creating a community energy aggregator to club together small amounts of domestic household flexibility and sell that back to the network operators at a national and local level. And during COVID, we've managed to recruit 20 participants to this trial already without having started promotion. And that comes directly from that ongoing relationship that that community has with their membership. That couldn't happen without that kind of existing trust and that existing relationship that's already there. Of course, we're in Community Energy Fortnight now as well, and Rashid will pick up on this, but that gives us a huge amount of opportunity to engage online with people about community energy. So there's lots going on as part of that. In terms of and shared ownership, I've just put up this slide because I think that the system, Ofgem, the government and the network operators are starting to recognise that they can't do this transition without involving communities and local energy organisations a lot more effectively. And we're seeing that in the actions that are being proposed in the, for example, Western Power Distribution Net Zero Community Energy Strategy published last month and the Northern Power Grid Strategy published last month. They invited us to help them write this because they're interested in how they can engage more proactively with communities. So in terms of what's next, just in summary, it is going to have to be big. I put it with batteries and flexibility contracts because I get asked this all the time, like, should we be doing batteries? Should we be doing flexibility? And that's challenging financially at the minute. It's hard to make projects work without all the bells and whistles, but I think that will come eventually, and it will start to come as the cost of batteries drop. In terms of shared ownership, we've got those targets in Wales and Scotland, which is fantastic. We don't have the same sort of policy drivers in England, and we really need them. The collaboration with local authorities, I think, is going to be one of the main areas of growth because of that recognition of the additional social value that community energy delivers. In terms of innovation, communities are already innovating, and Laura's talked a bit about that, and I've talked a bit about that, but that is going to be fundamental, because how do you do local supply without doing an innovation project, and how do you make sure that that local return investment is really retained in that local community without doing an innovation project. So those projects are key to understanding how we can change the system to make it more democratic. And of course, mass public engagement is going to be absolutely essential. That's already started to happen in terms of Extinction Rebellion and campaigners starting to think, what can we do practically to really make a difference to climate change? So I'm going to leave you with this little poem. This is part of our Arts and Energy programme. It's a poem with a very long title about a partially submerged man in Dorset thinking about what he should do about climate change. And it says, I want to go renewable so my streets are less canoeable. Thanks very much for listening.
Sorry, I'm just unmuting myself. That was fabulous. Thank you very much, Jodie. Some more food for thought, and I'm sure Scott was listening intently there for our next but one speaker. But following on from Jodie, we have Afsheen Rashid, who is effectively the founding director and CEO of Repowering London. Afsheen is basically, she has had, she was a senior policy advisor at DEC. She is a community energy specialist with 15 years experience. And she's basically done things like spearhead Lambeth Council's community energy program in the past. So here's someone with some real experience, again, at probably a slightly more city and than rural level, but somebody with some really good insights to give us, because she's been using some of the technologies hopefully we'll be able to use in the rural areas in the future. So again, I will hand over to you, Afsheen, please.
Sorry, I needed to unmute myself. Technology. Thank you for that. As Jeremy's highlighted, I work in London, and Repowering as an organisation is based in Brixton. And because of our origins in Brixton, our way of developing programs and shaping programs is really around the community and how they can benefit, how they can participate. It's about being inclusive, about being fair. And this is something that we've adopted from the very start of our journey back in 2010. And because of our Brixton base, and we, being the first to have developed community energy in an inner city environment on social housing, when people told us you can't do it, we were the first to actually break the mold of community energy just being seen as something that happens in rural communities and happens with participation from typical white middle class people, but actually we can include a lot of diverse communities and people who can't necessarily afford to pay or invest in these schemes. They still have a role to play. And based on that, Repowering has developed a program where, we run local leadership programs, training programs for young people, for adults living in the community, alongside the development of our projects, be it solar panels or be it our innovation projects, with providing support and advice on fuel poverty, and a very democratic, inclusive model where people can join our co-ops either as investors or with a £1 membership, nominal fee that they then have equal say in decision makings in our co-ops. So that's a bit into our history. I'd like to talk more in my presentation. I'll be talking about a lot of what our focus is and what the opportunities are, and it links very well with what you've already heard from Laura and Jodie, and this is from a practitioner point of view, what's happening, what we're doing in London. We've supported 8 different local energy co-ops across London, and the last few years has been a mad rush to meet deadlines, which have been imposed externally, with the feed-in tariff constantly slashing and getting cut and ultimately disappeared. So we have no further government support. And with that very challenging landscape, we've enabled some of what you can see on the screen there, kilowatts installed, 670, and this 670 sounds really small, but actually it involves over 50 buildings. So in London, in a city urban context, we don't have the luxury of big, large roofs. Only one of our sites have, you know, more than 30, 50 kilowatts on the roof. So they're real small systems that are owned by these co-ops. And one of the things that we're really proud about in Repowering is our work of training young people and involving them. And we've developed a AQA program, accredited training program, which young people have benefited from. And in the current context, our focus, now that we've taken a bit of a time to breathe and reflect, is around really harnessing that community support, those community networks. We are looking at how we can achieve that scale in terms of the context of climate emergencies. And we're really honing in on our partnerships and really working hard with cross partners from private, from research academic institutes to really build and develop our innovation projects. So that's what I'm going to talk about through my slides. So touching on that community, movement building, community energy organizations, we're not just developing energy projects, renewable energy infrastructure, we're very much about community development as well. And our volunteers, who are the beating heart of these projects, are the ones who are, deciding, shaping, influencing and building these projects, identifying sites. And with their experience, from marketing to legal to financial spreadsheets, everyone has something to give and share and also take away from these projects. And we've seen our volunteers taking on more roles of leadership and becoming directors of the co-op. And more recently, we've seen, obviously, with this huge demand and appetite from the public in terms of what can we do in our local areas, we've really started these conversations and running events and connecting people, sharing knowledge. So it isn't just about energy, we're also talking about, yes, transport or waste, minimizing waste, and what other low carbon lifestyles or sustainable lifestyles people can adopt. And it's just really about that, bringing the community together, bringing local people together. That's really important. One of the models that I'd like to highlight and share with you, and that's really working well for us, is that community champion model. So it allows for that employment, local people who are learning skills, for them to have some work experience and to be paid for it. But they're so important in terms of designing and shaping these projects and connecting with the community. And during this crisis of coronavirus, they are the ones who have been shaping our program of how we can reach with vulnerable residents, how can we connect with those community groups that are providing those essential frontline services, and making sure that our support, which is the free helpline to help residents with their energy bills during such times, or even helping tackle some of the problems around possible disconnection if they're on prepayment meters. That's the kind of support and service that we're providing online through the phone helpline, because people who are vulnerable and can't access a lot of this media and information, making sure that we've got flyers that are distributed in food parcels. This whole kind of response that we've been able to develop has been possible because of our champions who live locally, have their ears on the ground, and are able to give that feedback to us and then shape and develop our support programs. So absolutely vital to develop your schemes are those champions. I've touched a little bit on our training program that we're really proud about, and moving forward we're also developing a peer-to project for primary school children, so taking inspiration from Regen in terms of using art and culture in this context, and really developing those messages. Young people are the future generations, and how we keep them involved in the future of this zero carbon future that we're developing, what their role could be, and these are a few things that we are doing. And it's because we're doing all of that, because we're linking with the community, we're developing that real grassroots movement. When we come to raising finance for these community schemes, people are willing to invest in these schemes and have local ownership and become members and have a democratic say in what happens. And that's how these projects get developed. And I've just included little image there where you'll see the blue dots and the yellow dots, and it just shows how local our membership is. So our co-op in North London and Hackney, a lot of those investors, more than 100 people, were from Hackney Council itself. And you see those three colours, the pink, the yellows and the blacks. They all are investors in our Brixton schemes, which are based in Lambeth. So it's just that local reach, local connection helps join the dots where people living in their local area can own this energy infrastructure, this asset, and ensure that the money that gets generated from this asset comes back into the community, either through the investment that people have put their money in, or through community funds that get recycled back into the local area. There are challenges in making these models work right now because we don't have a government feed-in tariff, but we are looking at models where we can look at carbon offset funds to then blend with community shares. And picking up on, you know, the point I was making earlier around innovation, that this is absolutely critical in the future development of our projects. And we're involved in a few trials around local electricity supply. So how can we sell that electricity? Again, bringing that connection closer to people living in those blocks or those sites, because most of our schemes are on social housing properties. And we want to make sure that people who can't afford their homes and people who cannot afford to invest in these schemes can still benefit from the energy revolution that we're seeing through reduction on their energy bills. But this is possible because we're working with partners like EDF, UK Power Network, and other suppliers to really test and develop what these schemes could look like and how they can become scalable and commercially viable. Just touching on innovation as well, other projects we're involved in around DSR, domestic DSR project called Home Response with Greater London Authority. We're also working on a scheme called Green Skies, which is a smart local energy network in Islington. And both these projects are funded through BASE, Innovate UK, and they really bring multiple partners together to enable these schemes. They're very much in the design stage of development, and the whole concept is to understand the support to demand, but commercial viability, scalability, replicability, not just where we are in London, but beyond as well. For me, I'm just going to highlight this. This is about knitting together what is, for me, is at Repowering, our theory of change is really about bringing all of those different business models together in a local context, in a local area. And so just very briefly touch on that slide. And I want to finish off with Community Energy England's report that has been launched as part of Community Energy Fortnight, and we've developed a vision statement for 2030 for community energy. And it's really about that just transition, democratic, decentralized, decarbonised energy system, which people are at the heart of. And if we have the right support from government, from the partners, from the opportunities, then we can be 20 times larger in terms of our generation capacity and in terms of how many people we reach and support, and money going back into the local economy. And just to finish off, that's what our vision is. And again, I would really encourage you to look at the Community Energy England's website. They've launched 2 reports, and one is the latest State of the Sector report for 2020 in terms of what's happening across the UK. We've got over 300 community energy organisations participating, and the figure there that you can see in terms of renewable energy generation, which is 193, it's for England, Wales. It doesn't include Scotland, and if we included Scotland's figures, it would be 265 megawatts of renewable energy generation capacity. Just to put that into context, on a yearly basis, we're putting back money into the community, through local economic benefits, and in 2019 that was £4.6 million going back into those communities. So there's a huge potential, and I think what we're looking for is the support and collaboration to move forward. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very, very much, Afsheen. At this point, I will apologise to everybody who's on this particular session, because the Bright Talk system does not seem to be working very well. So what I'm going to do is I'm giving people a little bit more time on their sessions, and then I will pose some questions for them at the end. But that leads us very neatly into Scott. It's very clear from everything that's been said today that networks are the key. If you don't have the right infrastructure, you don't enable the networks of the future and the technology of the future, and you cut hugely the options available to communities to invest and to take part in this green revolution, if we want to call it that. So Scott joined Scottish Power over 25 years ago. He's gained experience through both strategic planning, regulation, financial and regulatory reporting, and also asset risk management. So he's now on the main board as far as SP Energy Networks are concerned, and we couldn't have a better quality person to talk to us. Remember, everything Scott says has to be tempered by the fact he's got a regulator sitting and looking over his shoulder, and that although he would love to do some more things, it's our job as communities to actually talk to him, engage with him, and then help him pressurize regulators to get more flexibility in the way that he invests, innovates, and delivers his systems of the future. But without any further ado, I'll let you start off, Scott.
Thank you, Jeremy. I don't have any slides, but I wanted to pick up. It's a tough act to follow three very inspirational presentations with people who are working day in, day out in the communities. But maybe just at the outset, one of the things that I want to explain as well is, particularly in the networks business, that one of the reasons that anybody joins on the network side is that you're part of a public electricity service. You're about keeping the lights on. And I think it's often forgotten that actually a lot of our staff come from those local communities. They go to colleges in Dumfries and Galloway and Forth, and they're part of the energy system that's transforming as well. A main driver, well, it's a big investor-owned corporate. Actually, that public service ethos is a core part of what we do. And we have 3.5 million customers to serve in SP Energy Networks across 2 million in the central belt and southern parts of Scotland, across urban and rural environments, and another 1.5 million down in Merseyside and North Wales. So we know very much the challenges that communities face, whether that's an urban community or a highly rural community. We've seen, 25 years ago, it's horrible that you said that, Jeremy, but when I joined the industry, it was almost unthinkable that Scotland would have no coal connected to the transmission system, that the large monoliths like Kenzie and Long Annet would have disappeared off the system. But in the last 10 years, we've seen a transformation in our energy system. Now 97% of our energy is sourced in Scotland from renewable sources, which is a remarkable feat. We have 11 gigawatts of renewables connected to a grid that serves a winter peak demand of between 4 and 5 gigawatts. And that transformation has happened by companies trying to be agile and respond and working in communities in a different aspect in terms of planning systems. I think the thing for me now is that isn't changing. The job is not done. In fact, the job is picking up pace, because we need to now tackle heat and transport. We know that there needs to be a fundamental transformation of our heat and transport systems in order to become zero carbon. And I'll try and pick up on some of the themes that each of the presenters have also picked up. We've just published something called the Future Energy Scenarios. Now, those are often published by National Grid, and people look at them on a GB basis, but I don't like averages. You can have your feet in the fire and your head in the fridge, and somebody will say that you're average temperature, but the reality is that's not good for anyone. So what we've tried to do recently is make those future energy scenarios regionally specific to central and southern Scotland, to the communities that we serve, and to Merseyside and North Wales as well. And what you see from those in the distribution systems is that you will see from local communities and from other parties, we will see maybe a further 3 times the level of distributed generation seeking access to the distribution system. We will see quite literally hundreds of thousands of electric vehicles, whether that's public or private transport, hit our streets. And heat transformation could be massive. And again, remember that we are largely agnostic as to whether or not you head towards hydrogen, because hydrogen requires the process of electrolysis that's ultimately fueled by electricity. And moving to a hydrogen world requires even more renewables and even more infrastructure to support it. But I was working with one of my young engineers recently, and they highlighted to me, so we have a thing called the after diversity maximum demand. That's where we look at what a domestic customer's contribution is on average over a 24-hour period to the demand that will be placed on the cables and wires that are in our streets, the low voltage system. And when you look at a heat system, it can place anything between 3 and 7 times the level of demand on that low voltage system. So to pick up on that theme is what we see is a consumer-led, community-led revolution in how we utilise our energy system that actually will move from the big high level, the 33,000 volts and above system down onto 11 kV and down into 430 volts and down into the electricity supplies in communities and in homes and local community halls as well as domestic premises. And that requires a different type of thinking and a different type of engagement. So a big transformation in the way that we need to look at the future as we look ahead. And it's why I am so deeply interested in local energy systems. And I fundamentally believe, as does our board, that we have a mutually supportive role in ensuring that those community energy systems can make sure that we realise a better future quicker as a nation and as a society. We also, it would be remiss of me to not make we're all on a webinar today, we're all at home. I'd like to be coming to you from a substation, clearly being an anorak, but I'm not, I'm at home. There's a CD rack behind me, you can see that. But we need to think about not only the medical impact that the pandemic has had upon us, but the economic impacts that we face ahead and the green recovery that will be part of the recovery of the nation's economy as well. One of the things I feel personally very, very strongly about is that community energy transition, relying on staff that come from those local communities, it has to create jobs and it has to create a better environment. It has to not only achieve net zero, but it has to create jobs within those local communities to really transform it in a rural setting and in an urban setting. So we were behind a scheme, a £20 million scheme as a company called the Green Economy Fund, which focused in 3 areas: education to transform capability and people's thinking about those local energy systems, about heat and the transport systems, and it invested in everything from looking at transforming the fabric of ageing buildings that were built in the post-war period, through to river hydro schemes in the heart of Edinburgh, through to community transport and electric vehicles schemes. In fact, I recently joked to our finance director that when I joined the electricity industry, I never thought I would have owned or sponsored so many buses of an electric nature, I hasten to add. We've also got into, I think we're very, very fortunate in Scotland to have the government that is forward thinking. That some of the level of renewables that we've seen connected to our system couldn't have happened without support. Real support, tangible support in changing the way that we look at planning in terms of our systems. And they've been right behind a project that we've been working on called Project PACE, which is about trying to help put more charging infrastructure on the streets, on public access charging, not domestic, not private, not commercial rental, but actually public access on Charge Point Scotland, charging points within 2 local authorities which have a mix of rural and urban environments. Towns and communities that have suffered in sort of a post-industrial reduction in terms of economic output and are trying to transform, but also have large urban content within the areas that they serve as well. And we're also really proud of something called the Net Zero Communities Hub, which is targeted at the type of audience that I hope is joining this webinar this afternoon, about bringing information about the grid to those communities and about allowing an interaction, a direct interaction through multimedia with those communities in a more informed way, so that we can really develop that mutually supportive relationship in terms of bringing forward local energy systems. So local energy system is extremely important, and again I would emphasise in both an urban and a rural environment in order for us to achieve the transition. The demand that will be placed on the electricity system that I have responsibility for, and I noticed that Jodie had referred to the priority service register and pushing that further. As I sit today, I have 3.5 million customers. Over 1 million of those customers sit in my priority services register. 31% of my customer base sits in that, and I have a direct responsibility to ensure that I understand their needs. And those needs vary significantly, for everything from people who are fuel poor to people who have different dependency, electrical dependency on the grid that serves us, that it can function, that we keep the lights on, that we keep that energy secure, we keep the quality of service up, and that we make sure that it's cost effective too. So I think that one of the things that it can often be the case, and I work in a hardcore engineering business that's customer focused and lives in the communities, and we focus a lot on how we will use our transformers and our cables differently, and how we will need to think about the rating of switchgear. But the reality is the contract with our customer needs to change going forward. That dynamic system that I envisage will have to occur electrically also has to occur in terms of the type of contract and relationship that we have with the customer. People will not only be passively expecting electricity to come out from our system, and will still depend on that in terms of security of supply, but we'll be looking to sell back onto that system in order to make sure that their investments in local community schemes work. And that raises big questions that I need your help, everybody's help that's on this call. It raises questions about the regulatory frameworks. I think we can be enthusiastic that at the start of his tenure, Jonathan Brearley highlighted a net zero action plan, but that needs to be transformed into real action. It needs a direction from government. In Britain, we see an abundance now of renewable energy, but that came from a direction from BEIS, from DEC before, and BEIS into the regulator as to what had to be achieved and how the system had to transform. And we need that in local energy as well. In fact, we need that in many areas in the context of that green recovery. There has to be careful consideration of the social impact and charging impacts, because when communities begin to change the way that we distribute those charges, it can equally have disproportionate effects on those communities that are fuel poor if they are not brought along on this journey. And I think that's something that we have to be absolutely conscious of, is that Jeremy has used this term and a number of the presenters. This has to be a just transition that creates jobs and ensures that those who are most disadvantaged in society also get access to public electricity, heating, transport systems, get the jobs from the communities, and do not see increasing electricity charges as a result of that. And that's the thing that has to be balanced in this, because somebody does have to pay us all in the system overall. And it's a stark reality we need to challenge. We've seen this year a record low demand in GB, partly because of COVID, as industry and commerce moved off the electricity system. Domestic demand went up and a greater dependence on that system, but it brought real challenges in terms of system operability. National Grid, the system operator, had to work with all the regional distribution system operators to contract with 3 gigawatts, over 3 gigawatts of distribution connected renewable demand just to keep the lights on. It needed to come off as demand dropped. The system had to keep in balance, and that had to be fast responsive, new contracts that were put in place to ensure that security of supply. And local energy community systems need to think about that as well, particularly with changing weather patterns as we look forward. And certainly anyone who lives in the northern part of Britain, and Jeremy, who's coming to us from today from Dumfries and Galloway, knows that and is acutely aware of it. That quality of service and resilience has got to be maintained through this transition, and I do believe it's a revolution, but it's a people's revolution. It's a collaborative revolution. It's an exciting revolution. It takes us engaging with pioneering local energy projects that have been outlined today, that we are investing in through our Green Economy Fund. It takes that direct engagement, that learning, that understanding thinking about it electrically, thinking about it economically, and thinking about it in terms of that customer contract to make this transition. And I guess I would leave you with the point that I don't just see that as our central role to help facilitate that. I see that as our central responsibility to help facilitate that change. And at that point, I'll hand back to you, Jeremy.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Scott. And that leads us very nicely as well. Several references in there to heat, effectively, and the importance heat will play in this, and the opportunities that heat will also give for investment and for a just transition. So I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, Andy Ewell, who heads up our heat team in Natural Power. I think his biog does him down, so he's responsible for anything up to 40 megawatts worth of biomass and heat projects, specializes in microgeneration, but also how to control thermal systems, be more intelligent like the Europeans are about how they manage thermal systems and create thermal systems, and how we might actually use distributed heat networks, etc., working with housing associations and everything else. So Andy is there to put a bit of flavor onto the heat side for us, and with that I will hand over to you, Andy.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Jeremy. So as you mentioned, I look after low carbon heat as a technology sector at Natural Power. And that means that ultimately I'm looking for ways for decarbonising the use of heat in our homes, our towns, our cities, and then ultimately the communities that form part of these areas. And I think just picking up on some things that have already been spoken about, in the context of a community, quite often this is what comes to mind when we talk about community energy projects. They tend to be rural or the rural ideals, which is why I found Afsheen's presentation very interesting, because it brought it right back into the urban setting. I feel it's very important to stress that this, for example, is a strong energy community, and as is this. And it's these communities as well that we need to ensure are engaged and brought forward to specifically what I'm interested in making sure they've got access to low cost and low carbon heat. Now, the thing about low cost and low carbon heat is that it's actually quite a difficult thing to do. Now, I quite often liken it to trying to jump into a moving aeroplane. The thing about trying to jump into a moving aeroplane is that it's difficult. You can see my notes. Right, keep going anyway. So the thing about low carbon, low cost heat is that it's quite a difficult thing to do, but it's not actually impossible. Now, these guys will have, they've probably not woken up one morning and said, hey Vince, do you fancy jumping into a moving airplane this afternoon? No, they've got up and they've understood what their objective is, and they've broken it down to a series of manageable steps until ultimately they're able to piece them all together and achieve something which on the outset appears impossible. Now, the same thing can be said for low carbon heat. If we break this down into its different component parts, first of all, the low carbon technology. So the source of heat is not difficult, relatively speaking. This is not the problem. Heat pumps, low carbon district heat networks, recovered heat, we can do all of this. It's reasonably straightforward. What becomes difficult is when the low carbon source of heat meets our UK housing stock. So in the UK, we have one of the worst housing stocks in Western Europe. We have a legacy of low cost gas, and this has led to, coupled with areas of extreme deprivation and poverty within our communities, this has led to a situation where we have a lot of legacy housing, which is very low quality and very difficult to heat. And it's where this legacy housing meets the new technologies that the difficulties start to arise. Now, the other thing that's difficult is that plans are also difficult. And if we're doing a community energy project, we have to have quite a clear plan. Now, sometimes we might be starting from a blank sheet of paper, and often we've got competing ideas coming in here as well, which makes it quite a difficult thing to do, accept that. Now the layer above that, the government layer that sits on top of all of this, governments are also difficult things to engage with. So governments are very good and effective at setting strategy. So they're saying we need to decarbonise by this date in order to avoid catastrophic climate change. But where it becomes difficult and challenging is they're not necessarily clearly setting out the plan on how you're going to achieve this, or having adequate and effective support mechanisms in place to help you do it. So effectively they're saying, on you go over there, but we're not going to take your hand and lead you over there. So that's a challenge, but actually it's okay. So we can step back a layer from that and we can start working on our plan. And organisations such as CARES are very good with the toolkits that help us to develop these plans as communities. And the plan does all the good kind of plan stuff. We've got some SMART goals in there. We've got KPIs, we've got measures to make sure we're on progress. But in the context of an energy plan, we first have to have a really deep and fundamental understanding of the energy that we're using. So how much energy are we using within the community? Is it the right amount of energy we're using? Could we get by with using less energy? How does this energy change over time, over the course of a year, or even longer term as our community is projected to grow? So that's perhaps looking at metered data if we have it. It's perhaps looking at fuel bills, but it's also going beyond the raw data and understanding the fundamental need for energy and how it exists. So the other really important thing to stress about an energy plan is it needs to do with the low cost, low carbon piece. But if your energy plan is also going to create properly heated homes, you've got a health benefit associated with that plan. If your plan needs people to do stuff, you've got employment and you've got training embodied within your plan. You could be retaining people to live within your community, so it's got long-term sustainability. You could be attracting new employers to your region, so you've got economic benefits. This list goes on, but you get the general gist. There's all these other things that need to be wrapped up in your community energy plan. And if you get those in your plan, take it back to these people and explain, hey, I'm going to meet your primary energy strategy objectives, but I'm also going to do a bit of health, a bit of education, a bit of employment, a bit of economic growth. You're much more likely to get their attention and get effective support mechanisms from them. So if you have your plan, the first thing that your plan really needs to do is address these fundamentals first. So as humans, perhaps we're attracted to some of the shiny stuff, the gadgets and the gizmos, the battery packs or the electric vehicles. And specifically when I'm looking at low carbon heat projects, we really need to get this fundamental of energy efficiency within our buildings fixed first. One of these things that we just do it once, we do it right, and then it just keeps working year after year. There's no ongoing operating costs, there's no maintenance costs associated with it. You will have lower energy bills, you will have healthier homes. Therefore, you're going to get healthier people within your community who've got more money in their bank accounts at the end of the month. It's also a critical and key enabler to low carbon heat. So once we've done this, then we can start doing this. Not before, it has to happen in that sequence. It allows the heat pumps to work and to work in a way which is effective. So for context, in the UK over the last 10 years, supported by renewable heat incentives, we've installed less than 60,000 heat pumps. Finland, a country with a tenth of our population, installed 100,000 heat pumps last year. Now, it's not because Finland has got access to some magical new heat pump technology they're not sharing with the rest of the world. It's because they've had the plan which has addressed the fundamentals first. They have much more efficient building stock that then enables the low carbon technologies to come in a way which is effective. Now, remember these guys. So I introduced them back at the start of the presentation, and perhaps I did them a disservice. Perhaps they did wake up one morning and decide to jump into an airplane. One of the first things they probably said was, actually, I don't have an airplane to jump into. So what they've probably done is they've picked up the phone, they've called Red Bull, and they've explained what they're trying to do. And they've also explained to Red Bull what the benefits to them are going to be. So Red Bull will have got lots of advertising, lots of brand awareness, and they've also got lots of community support. In this case, it's support from the extreme sports community. So where am I going with this? What I'm trying to say is that as a community energy project, it's very useful and valuable to be able to reach out to somebody to get that level of support into your project. Now, I'm not suggesting that you get sponsored by energy drinks, but if you have a community energy project, look around, because there may be other large infrastructure developments happening in the same area. It could be more house building, it could be road building, it could be a big renewable energy project with defined consumer benefits. Now, these are big companies, they tend to have big procurement arms. So perhaps working collaboratively with this company, you might be able to get a better deal on bulk retrofit of insulation, on bulk purchasing of solar panels, or bulk purchasing of heat pumps. They're also putting in bits of infrastructure. So they might be putting in the grid upgrade to the wind farm. Is that going to go through your community? And if it does go through your community, is it being designed and installed in such a way that allows your community to connect more heat pumps, to do more electrification of heat, to do more distributed generation? They might have bits of kit on sites. They might have drill rigs doing site investigations for the wind farm. When they've finished, could they go by your community and drill boreholes for ground source heat pumps, for example? So it's this way of collaboratively thinking and reaching out that they are costs for the big developer, but they're marginal additional costs, which could result in significant benefits for your community energy project. So thanks very much for listening. These are really just some of my ideas. There's no hard and fast rules here. Each projects are unique and each will have their own challenges and opportunities. But it's really put forward to get a bit of discussion going. We're really keen and interested to hear your views.
Right, thank you very much, Andy. The only issue we've got is it's difficult finding out people's views because I'm afraid for all of us, the Bright Talk function has collapsed on us. So that's going to leave it to me to therefore pose some questions, because this is still being videoed, people can still see it, to you all. And can I just say from my personal perspective how interesting this has been, because I have been charged by the South of Scotland Enterprise Board, where I am the board member responsible for energy, to create an energy plan for the South of Scotland for the next 20 to 30 years. Now, when looking at what Andy just said and what the other speakers have been saying, this ties together everything that we've been talking about. Fundamentally, there has to be the just transition. Fundamentally, there has to be an infrastructure. We haven't talked about communications much, but without good communications and good broadband, then the whole thing falls apart, because you can't have intelligent systems, disruptive technology, and when I say disruptive, that means good disruptive technology, creating, aggregating, and managing things for us, unless we have the comms in place. And then we need communities to analyze their own opportunities locally, because as we said before, these are massive targets. This year alone, we're going to have the Climate Change Committee come out with its COVID report in the next week or so. They're going to actually state within that they believe renewables can now do 100% of the electricity needed in the country. That's very positive. They've got the 6th carbon budget to follow that at the end of the year. The Scottish Government are producing their 2045 pathway. So if we get this right, the prize that is available to communities is to design the systems locally, agree that with the council, do what you're good at, do things where you have a competitive advantage, because the country needs cheap carbon, as Scott says. Cheap and good carbon results locally will produce local jobs. This is a fantastic opportunity for insulation, people to do insulation and get good at that sort of thing. Get good at heat pumps, at both heat pumps and other installations which actually improve the efficiency locally for communities. And once communities have got a plan, once they've gone to their regional council, that regional council can embed those plans into their regional planning guidance. That then means it's easy to implement. Then we go up the level to where Scott and I have to work quite a lot in relation to central government and what's going on. Well, there's something called National Planning Framework 4 in Scotland coming up, which would enable us, if we find the right types of keys, to actually bed in for 10 years planning derogations, which would enable us to push forward this revolution and to make it happen, and to enable things which otherwise might have been stymied or slowed up substantially by planning in process. Regulation needs to get far more dynamic. Scott was very polite about Jonathan and his team, who basically are getting the message. They are being told that the CO2 targets are things that they will now be mandated on as far as their remit is concerned. So there's a whole stack of stuff in the background here. Communities have never been in a better place to design their own strategy and to engage with people who want to hear from them to deliver those strategies. So I think my first question to the team would be, how do we actually get together? Because as Andy said, as Scott said, as Laura said, and as Afsheen said as well, this is all about coordinating stuff. This is about trying to make things work together. So I'm hopefully going to do that in the south of Scotland, but how do we find these models to actually bring people together, to coordinate infrastructure, and to deliver the best possible opportunity for communities to then engage with that process and decide on plans, so we can aggregate those plans and invest in those plans, because aggregation allows for investment. You know, lots of small things. Look at what the EU is doing now. Lots of small heat pumps and various other things, if installed professionally and installed well, can be aggregated to become 1 million heat pumps for a single investor to actually do. But who facilitates that initial investment? Who facilitates that aggregation and then sells down that opportunity? That could be a role for government. That would enable communities to get really competitive funding, as if they were doing an offshore wind farm, pension fund scale funding, levels of interest rate. But can we deliver that at a local level if we can coordinate it? So it isn't about individual communities, it's about coordinating those communities. So can I challenge everybody to say, from that point of view, what would they like to do? What would there be one big thing that they could tie all of this together to, if they had the chance, to move forward and produce this holistic plan? So let's start with ladies first, Laura.
Thanks very much. I think you've mentioned a role for government, but possibly there's a role for local government as well, and local authorities, in helping to bring together key players within their areas. I'm sure there's going to be opportunities coming out through the local heat and energy efficiency strategies in Scotland, and there may be similar plans moving forward in other areas of the UK as well. So I guess it's maybe having that kind of regional forum that can create a plan for the area that people can work from.
Thank you. And Afsheen?
I agree there's a role for local government, but I think within all of it is a commitment, you know, like a fundamental agreement on what the principles are, that all stakeholders have an equal say, or, you know, I think it's about the power dynamic. And at this point, we still have very embedded, entrenched kind of cultures, and organizations have different ways of thinking. And I think it's about us having a recognition of the fact that where our strengths and weaknesses are, and how we can then capitalize on the strengths, really. So while a local authority has assets, you know, they have procurement frameworks and they have access to finance, cheap, affordable finance. On the other hand, communities have access to that mandate, that consent, that participation, localized solutions, but also ability to be flexible and agile to be able to respond to market very quickly than a local authority would be able to. And I think it's about, we have to really understand what our strengths are and to come together with that real and agreed mandate of collaboration. And it's not about them or us or competition. It's really about working together with the same goals and yeah, the same objectives, and there's alignment. And I think that principle foundation is really important for us to build here. And I'd just like to maybe showcase one of the projects we're working on, which I mentioned, Green Skies, which has just come together, which is about a local energy smart system, which is being designed with academics like London South Bank University, with the council, Islington Council, who's looking at their procurement frameworks and looking at the design stage. Partners like ourselves and other partners are looking at what is the community involvement, and we're looking at a co-design process, and we are literally engaging with community members in the Islington communities. It's yet to start our engagement, obviously because of COVID, but it's about that co-design process and really having that two-way iterative process where the technical design is being shaped and influenced by what the community hold valuable and important in terms of principles. And and Andy was talking about that cost and clean and community, and it's about bringing those three dynamics together when designing a network, and it's really important for us to get those fundamentals right.
Fantastic. Scott.
Yeah, Jeremy, I think you'll not be surprised to learn that I'm a fan of integrated planning. I think I agree with a lot of Afsheen's comments. I think local authorities have a big role to play in that they are our local democracy. They are hearing the voices within the area. I think we've some really good experience of working with Scottish Government, central government, on the transport project that I mentioned with PACE, where we've got the local authorities on board as well. And hopefully we've got local community service providers coming in to support the pilot project that we're trying to do. I guess what it sort of points at is that in any of these projects, right at the start, you need to make sure that you have the right partnership. I get quite frustrated at times when you have a transport project that's going forward and rail electrification, but it maybe doesn't engage with the electricity provider that provides the station supplies as well as the traction supplies ultimately early enough. But equally, there's other examples of that at the moment. The move towards a hydrogen economy. Again, I emphasise it can't happen without electricity, and we've an interest in understanding how that might evolve and shape and be different, in order to make sure that if there are large hydrogen production facilities being created, in order to provide that hydrogen into heat systems or into transport systems, then where do we need to build substations and connections into those facilities? So I think there's no easy answer to this, because what we're trying to do is democratise the energy system, so we want to hear more and more voices. But you do need to have some coordination, and I do think we need to get behind more our local authorities to make sure that they have the support in terms of the planning resources that they require, that they have the right have the right discussion at the council tables, and that's integrated and working well with government policy as well. And I think that's a challenge for us all. Maybe that's something that we can help facilitate, because we, in central Scotland, we work across 23 local authorities, for example, so we get to see what's going on in each of the patches.
That's great. Thank you, Scott. I'll ask another one, which is, because that sort of ties together, and I think local authorities are key. Everybody's recognised that, and I think they need a lot of help, because over the last 10 years, they've had their heads down, their shoulders rounded, they've been beaten by cuts because of austerity. It's not going to get any better for them. Budgets are going to be really, really tight. So how we support local authorities, hold their hands and get them onto the front foot to engage with government, to actually ask them for what they want for their local communities, and how we deliver that in infrastructure is going to be a really, really important transition for them. But the other big thing that I would like everybody likewise who can still hear this and to feed in at the end of this process is regulation. Every single twist, there's a regulation that gets in the way, whether it's a planning regulation, whether it's a grid regulation, whether it's a market regulation, whether it's a charging system. I would love everybody to say, what is their biggest pet regulatory hate that they've got at the moment? And Scott, obviously Ofgem won't be watching this, so that's fine. And also what we might do, what lateral thinking do we need? I mean, I'll give you one example that we've been talking about in the south of Scotland, which Scott will be amused about. And that is, unless you wear the grid anorak that Scott and I potentially possess, you would not know the difference between an 11 kV circuit and a 33 kV circuit. So why don't we just say in the NPF4 that I talked about earlier, why don't we just say that Scott can upgrade any 11 kV circuit to a 33 kV circuit without planning permission? They're both single poles with 3 wires on it. Looks like a fence, just like a new fence instead of an old fence. So why couldn't we do something like that? So that's that sort of lateral thinking I want people to think about, to say, where could we do things that are really simple, that don't really impact hugely on people's lives as far as their physical impact, but could offer huge amounts of opportunity to speedily respond to things in the future. So regulation is the one. I'll start with Andy because I'll go in reverse this time. So it's boys first. Andy, what's your biggest pet hate?
My biggest pet hate. People that know me might know that I'm a bit of a pessimist and I can be a grumpy old git sometimes. But I think my biggest pet hate is low carbon support schemes, which don't incentivize directly reduction in emissions. Okay, so where am I going with that is that we have schemes which focus on creating more energy, low carbon energy perhaps. So the renewable heat incentives are a really good case in point. So I'm a bit conflicted here because I actually quite like some of the things it does, but it doesn't, it sits alone. So it sits on the generation of energy side of things. And there's then a big disconnect between generating energy and saving energy. And the energy not used is the lowest carbon form of energy of all types. So it doesn't matter if we're generating using biomass or heat pumps, we're still using some electricity or some biomass fuel to go into it. If you cannot use the energy in the first place, then it becomes a big win. So that leads, the regulation leads us on to trying to generate more energy. And if we had a scheme which really valued the reduction in carbon outputs, then we would be able to bring in the energy efficiency things first, and we would perhaps even have a monetary scheme which supports and values the installation of energy and therefore the energy not used. So that's my biggest pet peeve, and if we could link the two of those at a regulatory level, then I might start smiling a bit more often.
Well, I'd like to see that, Andy, because obviously I see you more regularly than others. So yes, I'd love to see you smiling the whole time. Actually, he's not that grumpy, really. Scott, seeing as we're doing this in reverse.
Okay, I guess so. This is big. It's a big question. So, and I'm going to say that actually the thing that we really need, Jeremy, is decisiveness, and you know, Afsheen picked that up as well in terms of having the right framework that allowed local communities to get on. So, what I see is a net zero action plan at the moment, but I kind of don't see that actually translated into a framework that would allow any energy system participant to actually get on and get done what needs done. Do I think there's a lot of red tape in the system that needs cleared out? Yeah, but I often think it's used as an excuse for not getting on. The real issue is a lack of decision-making, clear decision-making and policy framework. I think you've got to be careful with what we try to change in some of the regulations because they do have unintended consequences. So I highlighted how I am hugely proud of the role that we've played in taking coal off the system. But with Long Annet closing in 2015, it meant that in a black start situation, rather than be able to restore supplies in 24 hours, it could take up to anywhere between 3 and 5 days. That's a fundamental change. And the UK had no standard for dealing with that transition. So we need to make sure that we are taking real care to protect consumers connected to these systems, whether they're local or national or whatever, throughout. So some of that red tape, I guess, is necessary. Some of it's an excuse. But the real issue is we need clear direction, as we've had in Scotland, for example, on what it is that people want to achieve for society and the local communities that we serve. It's not maybe quite the answer you were looking for, but I'd like to see a real clear blueprint for the energy system of the future across the areas that we serve, that I can work to and make sure that I'm delivering for you most of all. The red
Oh,
tape will take care of itself thereafter.
Talking my language. I mean, when you look at the larger scale, you've got the ScotWind side of things wanting another 10 gigawatts on the transmission network by 2030. You've got another potential for 8 or 9 gigawatts of onshore stuff to do all the community stuff sometime in that same sort of period. And it's taken us 15 years to build 5 gigawatts worth of sort of interconnection to manage ourselves between the systems. And there's no plan, there's no central plan as to how we actually deliver these things. There's lots of glowing targets, but there's no central planning to actually tie it together to create the network and the communication system that actually delivers the intelligent networks. Because again, what we've done to date is build a megawatt of capacity pretty much for a megawatt of grid. That's just untenable going forward. We need, we could probably build 60% of the network for 100% of that generation if we centrally plan it and have some better form of structuring. Now, I know that's much better at the distribution level, and Scottish Power, amongst others, are actually lead with SSE and a couple of others in terms of the innovation they've used over the years to get things on. So they're a lot further on than some of the other distribution network operators in the UK. But at the same time, if there could be a central plan with a least regrets system that enabled that plan. One thing I've learned, and I don't know about everybody else on the call, but in my time, my 30 odd years in the renewable sector, I have learned that you will never ever regret building a bit too much grid, because it enables things. And you will also never ever regret getting planning permission for something that you don't use. And it's damn sight cheaper to do that than it is to actually not have planning in time for something and the infrastructure investment and the investment be slowed up. So that type of thinking, these things that have been intimately connected before in a way that they can't be torn apart, need to be thought about so that people like yourselves can invest in the consents that are needed to enable you to make the choices, so that when the needs case appears, you can make that investment straight away, not wait for 5 years. So I share your frustration, and that was my diatribe on the issue. So I think we've probably got room for one more a question here, and I think from that point of view, it's a question of we've all given examples of communities that have done really good things over the period. How do we enable these communities to spread their messages much wider? Because there are really good examples out there of things that are happening. How do we make sure that the innovation that happens with one community doesn't get lost in that intimate area? How do we spread that across the UK, make that learning shine across everything? We'll start with Laura again on this one. Ladies first.
Thank you, Jeremy. I think from our point of view, we've got a lot of communities that we've been working with, obviously, and we're trying to share those learnings through case studies that we've been publishing on our website. But I think, yeah, you're right, there's a job for us to do to really shout about those, and for the communities themselves to shout about them and shout about their achievements and what they've done.
Government to give you the backing to shout about them. Yeah.
And I think, yes, the communities need to do it, and we do, and the government. So we've all got a part to play in talking up the projects, but also sharing not just what's worked well, but also what the challenges have been, I think is really important, so that people can learn from things that have maybe not gone quite so well and try and use different approaches.
Great. Afsheen.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's great for us to recognize how things have changed, and we no longer talk about community energy just within our networks, and to be here today at this conference and having a full session just demonstrates how it is being cascaded and showcased beyond just the usual networks. So I'm really pleased to be here today. And with Community Energy England, as I'm chair of Community Energy England, we have a network and a membership, and part of our role is about cascading, and not just to government, but to MPs, local councillors, and the communities, the work that we're doing, and enabling that sharing of the learning across our networks. I just wanted to also, while I am here, to also respond to the previous question you asked, Jeremy, which was around what is the bugbear and around the regulation side of things. And for me, I'd like to add, with what's been mentioned, is around social co-benefits. So any regulators also need to take into consideration the added value of proposals and schemes or business models that provide social and community benefits. So it's not just looked at purely from a affordable minimum price for the consumers, because at the end of the day, that, you know, looking at things from only that cost lens, we're going to lose out on the future that we need in terms of that clean, affordable green energy. So I think it's very important for that decision making to take that into consideration as well.
Yeah, and I apologise for cutting you off on that question. My apologies, actually, but that's a very, very relevant comment. Scott, what do you think on this?
So again, just to pick up from Afsheen there, she's absolutely right, is that at the moment we need to get the regulator to be able to think of, they talk about making sure that the network operators, for example, think whole energy system, but our regulator, that doesn't extend beyond electricity and gas. Mm-hmm. They need to think about the whole benefits that are actually arising from some of these investments. The mantra, which has been pushed at the Gas and Electricity Markets Authority at the moment, is net zero at lowest cost. Mm-hmm. That will not enable the future that we require. It has to be that full, wholly representative benefit model for society that needs to come into the regulatory framework and thinking. So just to add a wee bit weight behind Afsheen's point from two different ends of the energy supply chain. And with respect to sort of getting one of the ideas, so again, this is a theme you've picked up on at the end that's really important. So I mentioned the Net Zero Communities Hub. So we identified, how do we bring across all the areas, how do we bring all the good practice that's actually happening? How do we make sure that that's disseminated across the areas? We participate in innovation schemes where it's part of the funding requirement to disseminate. It sounds a wee bit like Community Energy England's responsibilities as well. So we thought, well, how could we help facilitate this? And we've consulted upon this idea of the Net Zero Communities Hub, and I'll maybe get details sent out to the organisers to make sure that can be accessed. But the idea of that is for everybody to participate in a much wider global community on what's happening in those local communities and share that learning and information, and equally to be able to interface with us and ask us the awkward questions about the 33 kV overhead lines and 11 kV overhead lines that you mentioned earlier.
Yep. Andy, I'm afraid I don't think there's going to be time for you to respond to this. With my apologies, I will take my punishment later. Can I just challenge everybody who's on the call to make all of the examples they've got and everything else? Can they provide some web links and that sort of thing to the organisers, so that communities that have been listening here, interested people who have been listening here, can actually access all of the really interesting things that have been talked about by the people on the call? Could you all make that commitment for me with a show of hands? Woohoo. Yes. Fantastic. Thank you very, very much. And the proverbial round of applause for being fantastic. Thank you very, very much, all participants. And we will wrap this one up now and say thank you for all those who listened, who persevered with the Fact Bright talk were there. I hope I asked some questions that were relevant, and we will look forward to seeing you again, hopefully in person in the future, rather than on this particular link, if All Energy can hold their conference in November as they're hoping to. Thank you, and good day.